The U.S. move to invoke UN sanctions against Iran has faced a firestorm of rebukes. In a joint statement, Britain, France, and Germany stressed that they cannot support Washington's move to restore the sanctions against Tehran. The statement added that U.S. measures are incompatible with efforts to salvage the Iran nuclear deal. Meanwhile, the U.S. Secretary of State claimed that the U.S. has every right to activate the nuclear deal's snapback mechanism.
UN Security Council Resolution 2231 is very plain. It says this set of states has the right to execute snapback. It's not conditioned on any other activity. It doesn't require compliance. It just says these countries can execute snapback. It's very plain. It's very simple. By the way, the UN is really good at drafting documents.
Mike Pompeo also criticized the 3 European countries for their decision not to support his country's push. Meanwhile, Russia has roundly opposed the U.S. plans as non-existent. Moscow says only a country that remains in the 2015 nuclear deal can trigger that is a snapback of sanctions. Russia has also called for a UN Security Council meeting on Friday to discuss Washington's attempts and move. Since leaving the nuclear accord in May of 2018, U.S. has been pressing ahead with what is called maximum pressure campaign against Iran by reimposing sanctions and coercing others into following suit. Joining us now out of Bristol is Tony Gosling, investigative journalist, for more on the story. Hello, Tony. Hope you're doing well. Always a pleasure to have you on and get your perspective on things. Now, Tony, your thoughts on Mike Pompeo's level of confidence that he's exuding, saying that he knows that the U.S. has every right to snap back sanctions.
Well, of course he doesn't. I mean, basically, he is talking out of both sides of his mouth. He's trying to tough it out, but he doesn't have a leg to stand on legally. Not that the law means very much when it comes to United States international relations and regime change attempts, because that also is against international law. I think, it's fair to say the United States brand around the world is becoming toxic. It's only on British television and American television, and in some cases European television, that the Americans are seen as anything other than lawbreakers around the world. I mean, they're really the most toxic brand on the planet. We've just had, by the way, I don't know if you can see this in the UK, this documentary coming out, which is called Coup 53, and this is being shown and actually advertised all around about how the United States led the coup in 1953 with the involvement of the British in Iran. So this is not a new thing that Pompeo is trying to ramp up tension with the Iranians. He doesn't want to allow any country in the Middle East, particularly Iran, to have an independent view, and particularly if it's got a moral standard which is up to the standards of the Islamic Revolution. In fact, I think if he was to be measured by Christian moral standards, he would also be found wanting, even though he says he's a Christian Zionist, a big supporter of the Israeli state. I don't think he lives up to any of the Christian morals at all.
Right, and what about when he says that under his justification was under paragraph 10 of the UN Security Council Resolution 2231, it explicitly says that these countries stated, the P5+1 have the ability, the right to snap back sanctions against the Islamic Republic should it fail to abide by, the rules, the stipulations under the JCPOA. Well, guess what? Two issues here. First of all, Iran did abide by everything up until May 2018 when the U.S. pulled out. And second, when it says these countries, it's not a random 5 or 6 countries we're referring to. It's these 5 or 6 signatories to the JCPOA that he could just say, the U.S. still has this right. I mean, even other signatories, Tony, are basically scratching their heads at the U.S. justification. They're running out of legal angles, and really what they're coming up with is asinine.
Well, he has a major problem, Pompeo, and that is any kind of credibility. He's trying to invoke clauses in an agreement which his country pulled out of 2 years ago. So how can he be invoking clauses in an agreement that he's not part of? This is a basic fundamental flaw in the State Department's current policy. And what's happened is that those countries who are still in this agreement, the JCPOA, they are saying, well, sorry, United States, but we actually don't think that this should be renewed. You can't invoke a snapback agreement in a sanctions deal which you've now pulled out of, or well, it's a trade deal effectively that you've now pulled out of. So effectively, the United States are trying to bully us. I mean, the background to all of this is we've got a very strong Israel lobby, both here in the UK and in the US and in other parts of the world, France particularly, which is pushing for a war in the Middle East. And I'm afraid that's what they want. I mean, the Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israelis have got a serious problem at home with credibility, and demonstrations every Sabbath day outside Benjamin Netanyahu's house, his official residence. And at the end of the day, this is a major problem for Netanyahu. He can see, as many despots have in the past, that the best way to distract from problems at home is to have some sort of foreign conflict. The Israelis have been pushing for a war with Iran for a long time, and they're trying to drag the United States in with it. I think that's the actual background. And then you've got a wider conflict, haven't you, between the US and China. And if you want to find out who is pushing that, I think more than anyone else, this is just my personal opinion, you need to go down to number 301 Park Avenue in New York City and knock on the door of Henry Kissinger's suite, because he has got lines into both sides of that conflict. And in the past, for example, he's made sure that US companies have been making a lot of money supplying vehicles, military vehicles, to the old Soviet Union right in the middle of the Cold War. So Kissinger, I'm afraid, is someone that I would like to see answer some questions. Of course, he likes to write articles, but he's always dodging the questions. And that, I think we're on two levels. We've got a conflict the Israelis are trying to start in the Middle East, and a much wider conflict which people like Kissinger are pushing for between China and America. All this is dangerous stuff, and it's great to see the European powers, Britain, Germany and France, all pushing back against the US against this attempt to scupper the very important JCPOA, which is probably the only thing that's been keeping us from economic warfare and possibly even a shooting war.
And it's funny that you should mention that as your final part of your statement there, because that's going to bring me to my final question, Tony, before we let you go. So how does that play out when Paris, Berlin, and London have opposed the U.S. bid, and the closest allies that the U.S. has?
Well, it does show that there is a little tiny bit of independence. Remember, we saw the same sort of thing as the British Parliament voted against the attack on Syria back under Ed Miliband when he was opposition leader. I think it was, I can't remember the exact date. Was it probably 20, just before 2010, sometime around there, in the previous administration around David Cameron's time when he was Prime Minister. But we've seen the British push back occasionally at crucial points. And we've also, of course, seen the British embassy return 5-6 years ago or so back to Tehran. The British and the French and the Germans do not want to see their continent and the Middle East be bullied into a war where, which could drag the Russians in, etc., and it could spread to Europe. But the Americans all the time are trying to push wars that are not in their own backyard, and thankfully the Europeans seem to be pushing back against that. They do not wish to become the battlefield for America's next conflict.
All right, Tony, stay safe, and thank you for joining us out of Bristol, Mr. Tony Gosling, investigative journalist.